So we're going to get started on our webinar. Good afternoon. My name is Carisha Gamble. I am the chair of the programs committee for the University of Cincinnati Friends of Communication. And I'm so excited today that you are joining us on this webinar. And today we have a special guest. Her name is Alicia Shoults. She is the marketing and PR director for the Ohio Expo Center and State Fair. She will be talking to us about communicating, about crisis communication. So Alicia, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thank you for the introduction. Well, I appreciate you all joining us today. I was just talking to Kevin a little bit before this about how, you know, when it comes to crisis communications, I feel like it's incredibly important to share the information that we have learned. I certainly had a crisis communications plan going into this and had dealt with a handful of crises, you know, as I always say, and I'm sure many of you do as well. It's not if there's going to be a crisis, it is when there is going to be a crisis, and how bad and severe and who's involved with this. So we had been through a handful of crises. This by far was the largest, and despite the fact that I had a crisis communications plan that was pretty detailed, I think it was about 26 pages long at the time, we definitely learned where some holes were. So what I would like to do today is go through, let's see here. All right, I'm learning how to operate the computer properly, I guess, today. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the clear, open lines of communication that we had, responsiveness and transparency, logistics, because that was a really big part of this, social media during and after a crisis, our return to normalcy, and what happened in terms of anniversaries 1 year later. So I'm going to go through a little bit of what happened with us, just so that you can kind of see how it transpired, what we learned, and then apply that knowledge and in your companies and to your crisis communications plans, because I'm sure different people will have different takeaways from this. So what happened? Well, I've got this video. Let's see if it plays here from the Today Show. There was a very tragic, fatal ride accident on opening day of the 2017 Ohio State Fair, and our hearts were just completely broken by this. And I'm just going to go ahead and try to play this video.
One person is dead this morning, 7 others injured after this twisting and turning amusement park ride unexpectedly broke apart at a high rate of speed. We do want to warn you that some of the video you're about to see is disturbing.
So the Ohio State Fair, the whole ride just broke. People just fell out.
Overnight, something went horribly wrong at the Ohio State Fair. A swinging ride called the Fireball ripping into pieces, sending passengers crashing to the ground.
At least one individual has come off a ride at the fairground.
What was supposed to be a night of fun instantly turning into chaos and confusion. Kaylee Bellamy says she was next in line and saw the whole thing happen.
It was going for a minute, and it was at its highest point, and I saw somebody fall out of the ride.
This is just real tragedy.
More than a half dozen injured riders were taken to nearby hospitals.
Multiple passengers were ejected at high speed with high energy, many feet, at least 20 or 30, if not more, into the air, and then crashed at a significant distance from the ride.
Ohio's Governor John Kasich ordering a full investigation.
What I want to know immediately is, first of all, what are we doing with rides? And so we shut all the rides down. And then beyond that, we want to know about what's the process for inspection.
Authorities say the ride had been thoroughly inspected.
It's been looked at about 3 or 4 times over the course of 2 days.
The fair began Wednesday with 11 other rides closed because their inspections were not complete, though some opened later on. This 2012 video shows how the Fireball is inspected.
The way this works is these decks drop, these center decks, when this ride's in motion. So they have to check the hinging, they have to check the structural soundness.
It has to be sound because it spins and swings in a pendulum.
Oh my God, you're bleeding!
A combination creating an aggressive thrill ride that this morning is a deadly one.
Records show the fireball passed inspection just yesterday, and a few parts were replaced back in May. Governor John Kasich is set to tour the fairgrounds here later this morning. Now, of the 7 people injured, 3 of them are in critical condition. Savannah and Carson.
So many questions, Blake. Thank you so much. By the way, in a statement, the fair organizers said their hearts are heavy for the families involved.
So as you can see, it was, national breaking news, not just here in the United States, but overseas as well. It was the lead national news story for 24 hours with continuing national coverage for about 48 hours. And then local coverage continues still even this year. About 2 years later, the coverage continued. And if anyone can't hear, I know we've got a little bit of a chat going on. If you could type in the chat, that would be really helpful if you can't hear, so that way we can try to troubleshoot and see what might be going on. So please feel free to type in. Okay, perfect. I see that we can hear at least a couple of people. So one of the things I wanted to talk about initially is clear, open lines of communication, because this was something that occurred at the Ohio State Fair, but it was not just the Ohio State Fair's crisis. The ride inspection program in the state of Ohio, all rides, whether that's Kings Island or Cedar Point or a traveling carnival that is in the parking lot or at the Ohio State Fair, those are all inspected by the ride inspection program under the Ohio Department of Agriculture. Because we are a state government agency, and this is state property, the investigators into the accident were the Ohio State Highway Patrol. Of course, the amusement ride provider, the individual who owned the ride, was involved in this crisis. The independent ride inspectors, we ensure that an additional layer of ride inspectors come on site beyond that state ride inspection program were involved, as well as the ride manufacturer who made this ride that was in operation across the country at this time. So for terms of teamwork, I know I mentioned that it wasn't just our crisis. And so there were different roles that needed to be handled. Again, the Ohio State Highway Patrol was handling the investigation. The Ohio Department of Agriculture handling the ride inspection program. The Ohio State Fair handling everything because it was here, as well as the logistics. And the governor's office, because all 3 of us are state government agencies. Planning and preparation. It's incredibly important to have a crisis communications plan and distribute it. It's only as good as the information that is shared. And so if no one else on your team or external audiences or internal audiences are aware of this crisis communications plan, or you can't remember what you even put in it, it's not going to be a useful tool. We also have an annual public relations and on-ground safety meeting that occurs each year. This particular year, it was about 2 weeks prior to the accident, and a ride safety meeting. That meeting was held 2 days before the accident. And that third meeting, the ride safety meeting, included the state ride inspectors, the highway patrol, the independent ride inspectors, and all of the involved parties, the ride owner and individuals as well. So that crisis communications plan, it's, as I mentioned earlier at the very beginning, it's a pretty big plan, about 26 pages. And here's just a couple of the items that are in the contents of that plan. This will obviously vary very much from one person to the next. I will say that for me, I had researched other crisis communications plans and attended some webinars through PRSA National to get some insights on how to build my plan. It has crisis prevention, communication objective, a crisis inventory, an inventory of key publics, action, news release information, information for the spokesperson, about a news conference center, crisis contacts, a list of key media, and the list of live newscast times in Columbus. We also maintain additional crisis files that have information on crises that have occurred, other places. So for us, other fairs, festivals, similar organizations, if we notice that a crisis has occurred with any of these individuals, we take note of that and save news clippings, quotes, press releases, and information as it pertains to those, as well as our own backgrounders and talking points so that we can be prepared. For us, there is a crisis inventory in our crisis communications plan, and a handful of the things that we've identified as being some of the largest potential crises are animal rights activism, background checks, biosecurity, evacuations, fair cancellation, food safety, protests, ride incidents, safety and security, severe weather, sex offender, violence, and a shooting. I wanted to mention that PR on-ground safety meeting as well. That occurs every year, 2 weeks prior to the fair. We have all of the individuals who could potentially be involved in an on-grounds crisis to the best of our ability. So we have an area of the fair, the Ohio Department of Natural Resources maintains a natural resources park, and they have some wildlife animals there. So that organization is present. Columbus Fire provides security, or Columbus Fire would provide the EMTs if there were an emergency that came from off-site. So they're involved. We have on-grounds EMTs and first aid. They are present at this meeting. Highway Patrol, who provides the security, Columbus Police Department, who is off-site security. So if someone steps outside our property onto 11th Avenue, then they are there for, they would be the ones who would handle that. So all of these individuals come together in this meeting, and we're able to not only go through crisis communications and who the public information officers would be in a certain circumstance, but it's important for us to have FaceTime with those individuals that could be interacting with one another. And this particular year, it had been managed so that everyone was on the same Marks radio network who would need to respond. So Columbus Fire and the Highway Patrol. So with one simple radio call, they were able to get the crisis response that they needed. Responsiveness and transparency. So as I mentioned, this was a breaking international news, and media was calling us immediately, and responding to all the calls is very difficult. You have to prioritize. We created a media Q&A sheet in conjunction with the Ohio Department of Agriculture. They were getting a lot of the same questions over and over. So coming up with those things that were the frequently asked questions and the responses so that they could easily just provide quick access to a one sheet. Public records requests, again, because we're a state government agency, we get a lot of public records requests, and we were getting a lot of the same ones. And so on the next slide, I'll get into one of the ways we handled that. And customer service. I think it's important to remember that when a crisis goes on, somebody is the person who's at the front gate at your agency. Someone is the one who's answering the main customer service phone call or the emails or the Facebook messages. And are those individuals being provided with accurate information and being trained on how to properly respond? So it's an important thing to make sure you're thinking about with your crisis communications plans. So the transparency and those public records requests. A lot of the things that were requested were contracts and ride inspections reports, and it was important to be as timely as we possibly could. So what we did was create a media website that was really a one-stop shop for all of the information. It was surprising at the time, despite the fact that on our Ohio State Fair website, there was a contact information for me. We were getting media outlets and people just tweeting at the Ohio State Fair, who's your media contact? Media contact. So we put together this website that we were able to provide a link to that had video of the press conferences that had occurred. So if someone was not able to attend and miss something, they could see all of that. B-roll of the rides being inspected, all of those requested documents. Again, there were a lot of things being requested, a lot of contracts, a lot of ride inspection reports. They are public record and everybody was requesting them, so we threw them up here all together. And updates as time was going on. And most importantly, contact information for those individuals who were here on site. So staying on message, really having one voice. It was important to know that if someone was speaking about ride safety and ride inspections, that was coming from the Ohio Department of Agriculture. From the inspection side, investigation side into what had occurred, that's the Highway Patrol. And about the fair, it's me. But it was also all of the the individuals, us public information officers who were in roles at different agencies, communicating with one another. So we knew what was being asked and who was saying what and how to respond, and pointing a lot of people to that website and any printed materials. And so there was just constant communication and partnership between myself and my fellow PIOs. And that's something that I think is important to think about as you move forward with any crisis communications plan. Do you know who you'd call? If you work with regulatory agencies or a provider of a material who, maybe provides a part of your product, or maybe does your background checks or anything, do you even know who you would call, who the public information officer would be there if there were ever a crisis? And so I think it was helpful for me to have that relationship and be able to know who to call. So industry communication was very important for us among the amusement and fair industry. So there is an association called the IAFE, the International Association of Fairs and Expos. And so we were communicating with those individuals. The Outdoor Amusement Business Association, they helped contact this IAPA. It's the International Association of Amusement Parks and Attractions, their safety committee. They contacted the ride manufacturer and the American Society for Testing of Materials F24 committee, which reviews the way that rides are operated, maintained, and inspected. The ride owner was contacting fellow ride owners. So just because this particular ride was here at the Ohio State Fair, there's many others throughout the country, and they were in operation at other fairs. And so calls were being made to ensure that was being shut down across the country while investigations occurred into what had happened, as well as local communication here with our city and state tourism outlets and the Ohio Fair Managers Association. There are 91 county and independent fairs in the state of Ohio, and many of those are volunteer run. So we were providing excerpts and information from our crisis communications plan to help those individuals as they learned how to talk and deal with the media, because many of those fairs had not even yet occurred, and were getting the calls and attempts to localize the story at their level. Logistics is one of the things that was really eye-opening here at the Ohio State Fair. Things that we needed, number one, were people. I am a one-person department on a year-round basis. I'm hiring another person, so that would be very helpful. And I have about 4 interns, and honestly, that just wasn't enough. We have a policy that no member of the media with a camera is allowed to just roam around unattended. We escort them, we help them find their interviews, we give them golf cart rides. And we just honestly needed more people. We also communicate on radios, like a walkie-talkie type radio basically, and we needed even more of those. More golf carts, portable chargers, always be charging. I never leave home without at least 1, if not 2 portable chargers in my bag. My crisis files. I like to keep things accessible, whether that's on Dropbox or Google Drive or whatever your personal choice is. Can you access that information on your phone? Are you carrying around a hard copy of your crisis communications plan? How is it that you have what you need? Laptops, notepads for taking notes, and cross-training. Do you have someone else? This is one where, again, I was a one-person team, and I needed help doing everything. I thought I could do all the things, but it just, it becomes impossible. And you have cross-training to help someone with pulling advertising, social media. Who is it that who has access to these files? Do you have a third party contracted? Or do you have someone else who might be able to help? For us, in the case of people, I know I mentioned that was incredibly important, but something that was very helpful to me was that being a state government agency, I had my colleagues at other agencies who I could call on. So I could have a colleague from the Ohio Department of Health or the Department of Transportation who had a few hours in their schedule and were able to come and help me just be a body and manage the crowd of people that we had. And that was incredibly helpful. And who is it that you could call in a scenario like this? We did do a press conference the night of the accident. One of the things that was missing was a check-in sheet. I grabbed business cards. I did not have a check-in sheet. We had to get a malt box there, which you would think would be easy, but because we were in the midst of opening day of the fair, our sound people were all over the place managing a lot of the different events. And so we got a malt box from them, as well as from our friends at ODOT, who were able to come and bring one. Getting a podium there, getting flags, thinking about who the speakers were going to be to communicate about this crisis, and that voice being Governor John Kasich at the time. One of the things that was missing, we didn't have an in-house videographer there. So we had to rely on some of the video footage from external parties. The media center. So I know I mentioned earlier that we have a standard operating procedure that no media is able to just roam around the grounds with a camera unattended. Well, some of our other procedures are that we don't mail credentials in advance. Some places they mail passes and you can just kind of come and go as you please. Every single person has to check in at our media center that's located off the grounds. It's kind of just outside the gates, and there's a little parking lot, and it's a temporary trailer. And so you have to check in there in order to get into the fair, and you have to be escorted. So a couple of people, especially the national media who came, said, is this the way this always works? And it is, and it was something that really helped us stay very well organized. I will say for us, we also had to make sure that we were reminding our Gates employees who were working at the many points of entry that you can't just get into the fair with a media badge. They needed to be reminded of that. It's something they're trained on every year, but especially in this scenario, because we did set up a media staging area. So for media access, one of the things that I felt was incredibly important was equal coverage and being fair. Everyone should get access to the same story. Someone shouldn't get more or less because they're local or because they're national. Everyone should get the same thing. And so having tours and control really helped. So, sorry, I skipped over there, my slide there. So we did set up a media staging area. And that area was over here in the yellow. If you can see that yellow square or yellow kind of shape off to the right. And the star, the pink star, is where our media center is located. So we have a little path, this blue line that we drove along. We drove past that red triangle. That was actually the ride, the Fireball ride, and followed that blue line along over to that yellow staging area. So it was a designated area that we had. It's already fenced in because it's used as runoff parking on particular days, and it's behind the rides. So it gave the media a shot, but not the shot. So they were able to have rides in the background, which is what they wanted, but they didn't have the Fireball ride in the background. There also were restrooms. There was a gentleman from a media outlet who showed up at like 2 a.m. and said he was here for the 2 a.m. presser. And I said, sir, there's most certainly not a 2 a.m. press conference. Got him set up, and he said, oh, man, I really need to pee. And so I was fortunate that I was able to call one of our employees who hopped on a forklift and brought me some Porta-Johns. But that was something that we really needed there. And then if there was additional privacy needed, we were able to golf cart people over to the McDonald's. I put the symbol there that was just on the other side. We also had food and beverage. We catered our crisis. We made sure there was plenty of food and beverage and everything for individuals there. And honestly, I probably wouldn't have eaten if it hadn't been for the food that was there. And we had someone in charge at all times of that media staging area. It was not me. It was someone who could filter questions up to the appropriate powers that be and provide that helpful consistency at the media staging area throughout the crisis. They were able to answer questions that anyone had and filter them up and get answers back to them. So here's some photos of the media staging area. As you can see, there's a lot of live trucks, tents, equipment, lighting. This really, became the home for a lot of people for 48 hours. So for staffing, we did staff those members at the media staging area, like I mentioned, and we had a lot of frequent face-to-face communication with individuals there, where that person who was in charge would just walk around. How's everything going? What do you need? Can I get you any information? Let me call and check on that. Oh yes, there's going to be a press conference. We're doing a tour at 2. Sure, if you want to go to McDonald's, we'll take you over there, but don't forget we're doing a tour at 2. So it was really helpful to have that frequency and communication and having someone who was able to be there face-to-face talking with individuals. If there was something that needed to be distributed, they were able to either go verbally distribute that or do a handout of a fact sheet or anything like that. So I will say that I talked earlier about crisis communications plan, and one of the things that I did not have in my crisis plan in 2017 were designating crisis roles. This is one where, again, I mentioned, it was a one-person department, and I thought I can do it all, and I definitely could not. So here are a couple of screenshots. There's this one, and I'll slide to the next page too, to share with you some roles that I designated. And I made this the very back page on our crisis communications plan so that it can be easily ripped off or referenced on the back, and you can write on there who's going to do that. Because each year we do have interns and things change, and depending upon the level of crisis and who's involved, it may vary. Let's see. So there's a social media manager you can see on this second page, a website manager, a customer service liaison, and media escorts. And some of these individuals may have multiple roles, but they may also only have the one role. And so, but it was handy. It was something I did not have the first time around, and I created for future crises. So one thing that was interesting is really who is the national media, and the producer from the national media outlet would travel here, as well as the reporter, but in a lot of cases they use locals. Sometimes they even had local producers, but the satellite truck drivers, they were local. The videographers tended to be local contractors, as well as the sound technicians. So these are people who, for us, may have previously been here covering our Sale of Champions livestock auction. They've been here covering other things, and so they're not just the national media. They're people who are in your community as well. And bottom line, they are people. They're doing their job, and we're doing our job. And we all need to eat. We all need to try to sleep, and we all need to get through this together. And I think that was important to remember, that this is who they are. So feed the beast. I know I mentioned earlier we catered our crisis. Didn't take a whole lot of pictures of the food, but here are a couple of the pictures that we took from some of the meals and snacks and things that we had available. We did do in terms of timeline. So the ride accident happened on opening day of our fair. The day, typically Governor Kasich would attend the Ohio State Fair on opening day. This particular year, his schedule was such that he was unable to attend that day, and he had a planned visit for the following day, Thursday, July 27th. And so we did a little gaggle, as you can see in this photo here, and a walking tour the day after. That walking tour was incredibly difficult to manage, and that's one where I definitely needed those people that I referenced earlier. Day two, we did on Friday, July 28th, a driving golf cart tour in which I recruited anyone I possibly could to drive golf carts. The girl in the purple on that first picture there is our junior fair board advisor. I had our payroll administrator managing the media staging area while we were gone. So we were really using as many people in golf carts and things as we could, but this was strategically timed out so that the members of the media, we would all go together. They could stop and get an interview with the vendors to find out whether or not their sales had been impacted. They could stop and get their shots of a barn. They could stop at our Ag School education program, which had been experiencing record attendance since the rides were closed. And they could also, strategically timed, get the video of the very first person to ride a ride as it reopened. So social media during and after a crisis, this is something that was also not really touched on as much in my crisis communications plan as it should have been. And I feel strongly that immediate acknowledgement is important in a case like this. So when I got the call that the accident had happened, I was here on grounds. I was in a different building, and I got over to the scene as quickly as I could. And while I was standing there watching the scene transpire, and individuals who are on social media, videoing and photoing and posting, I typed a quick blurb here. There's been a report of a ride incident. We're investigating and will report information as available. Showed it to a colleague who helps with traveling entertainers who was beside me, and posted it immediately. And so I will say that I felt that Twitter was most widely used by members of the media, whereas Facebook was what was more used by the public. So, but the media definitely went to Twitter to find information. So monitoring on social media. As I mentioned earlier, media were looking for contact information. We were able to monitor coverage and perceptions, and it was incredibly important to have those passwords and access. So are you already logged in to your company's social media outlets on your phone? And if you're not, do you have quick and easy access to those passwords that aren't back buried in your desk somewhere? Because even though your desk is not that far away, when there's a crisis going on, it's incredibly difficult to get anywhere. So make sure that you have those passwords and access to get in. Review and removal of existing content. So we removed all scheduled social. And as many of you will know, when you schedule social media advertising buys, that's not the same as when you schedule a typical post. And so all of that scheduled social, including the buys, all needed to be pulled. And as well as video and content review. Some of our TV spots, which were also on YouTube, actually had the Fireball ride. There's a screenshot of that there in it. And those were posted on social media, and they were in our ads. And so thankfully, we were able to pull the advertising that we had on local TV stations. And some of the news directors noticed immediately that we had ads, and they pulled those. So we were very fortunate that not only our media buyer, but also the news directors were able to help with that. So the fair's statement, this is one where, because there were many parties involved in coming up with the statement, it took a little longer than I would have liked. It was a little bit after midnight when we finally got something posted. And this is the statement that we came up with. And I was sitting in a meeting with a lot of the involved parties at the time. And I was just, it had been a very long day. For us, opening day is always long. We get here for the very first live newscast, and they tend to arrive at like 3:30 or so. So I'd been up and at work since 2:30 in the morning, and it's after midnight at this point in the evening. And for some reason, for the life of me, this is the statement we came up with, but Twitter was still only 140 characters at the time, and it's longer than 140 characters. And I didn't want the background of the Notes app to show up in a screenshot for Twitter. And I just, I was thinking and racking my brain and not really figuring out a great solution to this. And so until finally I had an epiphany that I should screenshot it from Facebook, crop it, and then post it on Twitter. And so that is what I did. So you can see back here to Facebook, 141,000 people that were reached, and Twitter, 167,000 impressions. And a lot of the impressions, I will say, this was widely embedded in news stories, whereas the Facebook post, again, was more engaged with patrons and consumers. So the media used and embedded the Twitter statement a lot, not necessarily Facebook. We treated social media as mini press releases, whether those were coming from us at the Ohio State Fair or our colleagues over at the Ohio Department of Agriculture. So sharing just very factual, relevant updates, anticipating and answering questions. People wanted to know about refund procedures. Are we closing? Is the fair still going on? And we really used basic verbiage and minimal punctuation and emotion. Not a lot of photos, not a lot of emotion. Here are the facts, and share that information and spread it. So a couple of additional screenshots. These are just very quick little tweets that we were able to post that helped show the furthering of information. So that information was being shared at the media staging area among the members of the media who were there, of which there were many, as well as the individuals who were following along on social remotely. So a return to normalcy. We did need to, as I showed in some of those screenshots, communicate the progress that was being made. Again, whether that was us or the Ohio Department of Agriculture. Things like the reopening of the rides, doing a media tour for that reopening of the rides. And then what was going on with anything else. We had to communicate that progress. One of the things that we elected to do, especially over the first, the fair's only 12 days. The Ohio State Fair is 12 days, and this happened on opening day, the very first day. And the reason the fair exists is because of agriculture. It's been around since 1850. And so we felt it important to not go completely dark on social. So this screenshot that I have here, that's from July 28th, a couple days after the accident. It's Friday. And the accident was on a Wednesday, but staying true to the fair's roots and honoring the fact that the fair is about agriculture. And so we had less frequency on social media, very gradual increase in delicate promotion. You weren't seeing posts like, come see the groovy guy juggler, or try this, wild deep fried item on a stick. That's not what we were posting. We were really talking about Ohio's youth and Ohio's agriculture and sharing that information, especially as we were monitoring dates and what was going on around us, like the memorial and funeral for the young man who was killed. So a couple of other posts that were shared here: Ohio State Highway Patrol, a cute little video of kids splashing in puddles, a young boy sleeping with his sheep, really just doing that and letting others help tell our story as well. We were able to, retweet without a comment things that other individuals were posting that were consistent with what we were trying to promote. Anniversaries were really important, not only the year of the accident, but as the accident continued and what happened 1 year later. So a couple of dates, events, and milestones to stay aware of. The memorial for the young man who was killed, I mentioned, it was 5 days after the accident. His funeral was the following day, 6 days after the accident. So it wasn't until after that point you saw anything beyond basically pictures of kids and animals. And anniversaries. The monthly anniversaries were, each month it would come up for the first several months. The annual anniversary, holidays. This is a time right now when a lot of us on social media we're posting greetings about the holidays. You posted a happy Thanksgiving, a happy New Year, especially that first year. The very few people who actually care whether or not I wish them a happy new year from the Ohio State Fair on social media don't outweigh the fact that a mother is without her son for the first New Year's, or a mother's without her son for the first Thanksgiving, or a sister's without her brother for Christmas. These are things that it wasn't worth it to me to post on holidays when someone else is suffering. And despite the fact that sweeps don't really exist in the same sense anymore, the sweeps mindset remains. So February, May, July, and November, expect there to be big stories that are coming as it pertains to the crisis. So 1 year later, 2 days before the fair opening, we always do a ride safety media availability. So in 2018, that was on Monday, July 23rd. And instead of doing our typical media ride safety day, we basically brought in the experts that we knew everyone was going to want to hear from: the independent ride inspector, the ride owner, the director of the Ohio Department of Agriculture, the chief of ride safety at the Ohio Department of Agriculture, someone who's on the American Society for Testing and Materials F24 committee, the chair of the Ohio Outdoor Amusement Business Association for the entire country. So we brought in all these individuals and did a press conference, and then did media avails where we were able to rotate and everyone could speak to each individual, get any questions answered that they might have. It's their chance to ask everything that they want, get all the information, and then get B-roll of rides being inspected. So here's a little bit of a summary of that. We did a pre-meeting with all of the participants that were the speakers that morning at 9 a.m. The 11 a.m. press conference had some speaker intros and some brief statements by each. That shows the list of who we had speaking. At 11:30, we went into the interviews and basically let those go as long as anyone wanted. Each media outlet had a PR representative to escort them from each one, and each speaker had a PR representative with them to help move the process along. And around 1 o'clock, everybody had kind of died down. They had gotten all of the coverage that they wanted, all the video that they wanted. They either headed back to the station, got in their trucks, or they came back later on for live shots around 5 or 6. And then I put a screenshot over here where the third-party inspector is saying that the Ohio Department of Ag has one of the best inspection teams in the country, and that coming from one of the local media outlets was very helpful. So it proved that this information, being able to just give the media everything they wanted, basically gift wrap with a bow, helped in not only making sure that the information was shared on traditional media outlets, but that the media were sharing it on social as well. So opening day and the anniversary, I will say that we had basically a 2-day anniversary. So the accident had happened on July 26th, 2017, but it also happened on opening day, which is kind of a landmark type day. So we knew that we would have anniversary related coverage for opening day, which was Wednesday, July 25th, and the actual anniversary, which was Thursday, July 26th. And our hope was that the coverage would really kind of start to turn after that weekend. We didn't really plan on anything big. We planned on basically negative news bleeding into Friday a little bit. So we had that 2-day anniversary. Generally, there was positive coverage. A lot of the information that we shared at that July 23rd event, where they got the story packages about the ride inspection program and changes that had been made, really helped to carry forth a message of progress. We did do a moment of silence at our opening ceremony. And families and victims visited the fair, and media went with them to visit and, allow them some closure. And again, we had a goal of resuming typical coverage by Friday, the 3rd day of the fair, and then that way in the weekend and into the next business week, we were able to see a little bit of a turn. Everything was under scrutiny, though, and that's something I think needs to be an expectation. So we have a giant slide. It's literally a giant slide. It's 144 feet long. One of the public records requests that was requested was about first aid injury reports. And here's this headline: records show the most dangerous ride at the Ohio State Fair, and it's one of the most popular attractions. And it's, of course, the giant slide. And what was interesting, too, to see was how the public commented on these. And so that's why I have that screenshot included. But the article does not say how many riders the slide gets a year. Almost everyone who goes to the fair rides the slide. If it only averages 12 injuries a year, I'd say that's pretty good. But everything, even if it seems innocuous, will most certainly be under scrutiny. This is a scenario in which a ride had its standard fail-to-safe go into effect, in which basically the ride stopped and then it lowered to let everyone down after a few minutes based on the standard procedures. Not a big deal, but someone went live on Facebook and it became an entire story. So anything, even if it's minor, will be under scrutiny. So that's about it. I guess I ended a little bit early here, and I don't really know if there's the ability to do this, but does anyone have any questions?
I haven't seen any come through, but if anybody has questions, feel free to use the chat function and we can address them. Cece, I'm unsure if maybe you had some questions in the hopper or not. But we'll go ahead and give it a minute to see if there are any. And again, Alicia, thank you very much for putting this together. Very excellent presentation and information on kind of how to navigate different crises. This is a pretty major one, I know.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I appreciate it. And, I'm happy to share any resources. I do have my contact information up here. So if anyone doesn't comment within the next couple of minutes and has any questions later, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I did my best to scrape the surface and share a little bit of that high-level information about responding to a crisis. I always say I'm like a member of a club that no one wants to be a part of, having dealt with a crisis in the national spotlight. And I think it's incredibly important, if anything like this ever occurs where you are, or for your company or for your agency, do your best to take a ton of notes and write everything down as you go, even if it's in the notes app on your phone. I know I mentioned I had like 4 interns that year, and I asked them all to keep notes on what was going on, what they were dealing with, what their questions were, what they were learning. And then at the conclusion of this, we learned that one intern basically had lost an entire day. Like it was not in her head. She just, and this, it happens. And it's because we write those things down that we're able to make improvements to the crisis communications plan moving forward and figure out what those gaps were, what mistakes were, and what we can learn through. Mm-hmm. So, Let's see.
Yeah, it looks like we got a question that came through. So this can be an incredibly stressful thing to work through internally. While addressing key external stakeholders and working with media, how do you keep up the morale of the internal team as you go through this sort of crisis? Great question.
Yeah, that is a really great question, Maria. And that's one that was very difficult because, I mean, for us, this occurred on our watch here at the Ohio State Fair. You know, we never expect someone to walk through the gates to have fun and not go home. Our hearts were broken, but it also wasn't our turn to have our hearts broken. You know, his family, those who were injured, I mean, those people came first, but we were still in our own ways grieving. And I think what we did was we really came together as a team a lot more. Not necessarily in any formal thing I can pinpoint versus just, you know, you actually have a 5-minute break when you're not managing something. You go and you sit and you chit chat and you hug or you cry, or, you know, you do whatever it is, but you check on your fellow colleagues. I mean, we offered counseling. Not a lot of individuals took us up on the counseling, but a lot of people were able to rally around one another and just have those moments where you're connecting that helped keep our spirits as high as they possibly could be. They weren't going to be great, but they helped keep us around.
Yeah,
So,
and it sounds like you had a great team all together too, which, you know, that helps in times of crisis like this to have a team that's all on the same page.
it really does.
Okay, so we've got one more. Oh yeah, go ahead, Cece.
I was going to ask Alicia. So, you know, I learned about you did a presentation similar to this during the PRSA conference, and that's how you and I connected together. For someone who does not have a team already established, what are your pointers in terms of like finding the right people to help you through a crisis?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it might be different for different people. You know, there are probably higher budget companies here who can afford to have someone on contract or who would be on contract as an external agency who you would know you could call on. Or if you have something where there's maybe even a similar branch of your office in another state or another city, or an association that you were a part of. You know, so for me, there's a couple things where I felt like being a state government agency, I could call on my colleagues who were in roles at completely different departments, but a similar role to me. Or I know I can call on my colleague or friend who does the same thing at a different fair. And I think it's really important to basically kind of put yourself in this scenario and think about who is it that you have that relationship with? Who is it that you would call? Is it someone who's a professional contact who, you know, works for that same corporation or company? Is it someone who's a friend who you're like, can you take a day off? I need you. And whether they're doing that as something that's a professional courtesy or just as a friend, but it's difficult. But I think you need to think about membership associations you're a part of, professional associations you're a part of, and companies that you work with on a regular basis to know who to call. So we have that other question here. How did you coordinate with the legal team when considering public statements and media access, and how did you manage conflicting opinions and motivations? So again, because we're a state government agency, we're a little unique in that basically legally, anybody who wants that contract can have a copy of it. We did run everything through legal. And for us here during the fair, we do have our legal counsel on site during the fair. And so whether I was actually with her or texting her, she was reviewing all of those public statements as well. And then when it came to media access, again, this is public property, but we are able to have some procedures in place in terms of designated areas. And so checking with legal counsel early that night, and as we continued on throughout the fair, you know, where is it that people can reasonably be? What is it that we can have policies in place that allow these things to be? And I will say that the media, having the access they had, they were happy with it. they were fine. You know, one of the comments that we got after the fact was, you gave us access, but not too much access. That particular individual said, you know, sometimes I've been involved in a crisis and I'm like, I don't know why they're letting me this close to the accident scene. And so I think it's important to put yourself in the shoes of the media and think about what they want when you're reviewing that information with your legal counsel and know what's going to happen. I will also say that, you know, we made sure overnight that there was no way anyone was getting into that ride. It was a crime scene. It was secured by the Ohio State Highway Patrol. A perimeter was put up around it. You had to check in to get in and out, and there was no way to get a visual. And so for us, having the access that was at a distance, and we drove people right by it and no one even noticed, was important. But I think that constant communication and just being able to share with your legal what your opinion is, why it's a valuable opinion, and work together to figure out what you can do.
Awesome. I think that does it for any questions that came in. I've got one last question for you, Alicia. I know obviously it takes a lot of time planning this and having some sort of plan and path forward from what you can deduce of what may happen at the event. When everything kind of hit the fan and happened, what would you average? How many hours were you working a day?
Oh,
like
yeah.
24 hours a day, pretty much. You
know, honestly, yeah. So from that first morning, I told you earlier, I'd been awake since like 2:30 in the morning or whatever, working on that broadcast. It was a 40-hour, I guess I could call it a day or a couple of days. It was 40 hours before I slept for the first time. But typical days were probably like 18 or 20 hours at least, with, you know, a couple hours to sleep at night and, you know, or nap under the desk.
Yeah. And that just, you know, the importance of the plan. Had you not had that plan, you probably wouldn't have slept for 2 straight days.
Probably
if not more.
Exactly. And, you know, one of the nice things, again, is, you know, taking those notes throughout and knowing where I've made mistakes, where I failed. Okay, our statement was longer than 140 characters. Next time, now that it's 280, that's in the crisis communications plan. Make sure our statement falls within that.